In this video, I'm going to discuss the different categories of fiction. So as I mentioned in my earlier video, a genre is a particular type of category of fiction. It can apply to both the long and short form, novel and short story, novella, respectively. It's impossible to give an exhaustive list, but it includes. So these are the different kinds of fiction that you can encounter. So crime fiction. A crime fiction is allied to mystery or murder mystery genres. Crime presents a story involving crime, the police, and the law. Psychological thriller. A psychological thriller is where a mood of high tension and excitement is created, mainly as the result of psychological drama and dilemma. An action thriller. So an action thriller is when you have a lot of action and lots of suspense. So many movies are action thrillers, like Mission Impossible. Realism. Realism is fictional writing that aims to represent everyday scenes, speech, and behavior through faithful depiction of real-life details without recourse to obvious literary devices or conceits, also known as truth to nature. So when you write realism, that means you're writing something very close to what really happened. Magic realism. Magic realism occurs a lot in exotic literature. So magic realism aims to convey events in a realistic manner, yet also involving a degree of surreal occurrences or scenes where the laws of everyday reality do not apply. And so a lot of South American literature is known as magic realism, where you have elements of surrealism or supernatural elements in the literature, making it magic. So I would say that although it's not considered South American, but Harry Potter has magic in it, so that could be magic realism. Dirty realism, originally applied to a particular kind of writing emerging from America in the early 1980s. Although it was much in evidence before the term was coined, this is fiction that engages with subjects considered marginal to traditional literary material, including everyday objects such as a scene at a laundromat, or dirty realities such as the life of a vagrant or prisoner. So that's known as dirty realism. Everybody knows romance is. So romance refers to novels where the stories are exaggerated or remote from everyday life. Now, it is often more taken to refer to a novel where the fiction centers on one or more love stories. And in French, the word novel is roman, R-O-M-A-N. Historical fiction. Historical fiction is action that takes place at least an entire lifetime ago, but not always related in the vernacular of the particular period being evoked. In other words, fiction that occurred at least 50 years ago. That's called historical fiction. A legal thriller involves stories that involve the law or lawyers, such as The Firm. So I remember watching The Firm, F-I-R-M. That's a legal thriller. And many TV series like Law and Order are legal thrillers. Gothic fiction. So Gothic fiction is something that was popular in the 18th and 19th century, involving supernatural or horrifying events. Usually it involves a haunted castle, some spirit that's and I remember English literature, Emily Bronte is considered a Gothic novelist. And so Gothic literature was very popular in British literature in the 18th and 19th century. Science fiction. Oh, that everybody knows what this is. That's Star Trek, that's Star Wars, and any time where you create your own world, and usually the setting is in the future. So science fiction is where an alternate reality is created, usually in outer space or on another planet, often involving a high degree of scientific or technical data about that other world. So Star Trek, I love Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie. Humor literature. Humor literature can also be satire. It could be like, let's see, Mad Libs was very popular in the 70s, and also children's literature. Also, anything that's funny. So fiction of any kind where the mood is humorous, although it also could be dark or black or biting, where the joke of the fiction is something more than merely funny. So I guess they're referring to dark humor. Fairy tale. A fairy tale is when you have a story that's not based in reality and not true, and you have supernatural elements in it, like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. Gay fiction. So gay fiction involves characters who are gay, who can be a lesbian, and traditionally gay characters were not included in traditional literature, or gay characters were portrayed as being, as if they were not people, or they were geeks, and they were always the side, like a side character. But in gay fiction, the main protagonist, the hero of the story, is the gay character. It's his or her voice, the gay person's voice, that's the narrator of the story, telling the story from the gay person's point of view. So, and also another thing is gay fiction is targeted for a gay readership. So, but not always. And so that's a newer for some people. So gay fiction is where the main protagonists are gay, usually but not always, aimed at a gay readership. Family saga. Family saga is a story that revolves around family. So Cheaper by the Dozen. That's a happy family saga. So anything that's drama that involves the family. Now, in all of these categories that I just introduced, these categories are not only stories that you can read about, but they are also stories that you can write about. And so I've already created a video about genres of, the different genres of fiction. And so the whole purpose of this video is not just to introduce the different genres of video, of fiction, but also to teach you how you can write in these different genres. You can write crime fiction, you can write psychological thrillers, you can write an action thriller, you can write a story with realism, and you can mix and match because all of these different genres also overlap. So you can have an action thriller that's also a psychological thriller, that's also a crime story, all in one, you see. So these are the different kinds of stories you not only read, but you can also write on yourself. Finally, the family saga, the definition came out. So family saga is where the story focuses on the activities, histories of one or more families shown over time, often related to a series of lined novels dealing with different periods in the family's history. Okay, so that's another definition. I said that any drama featuring families, like Cheaper by the Dozen. But yeah, you could also have like Roots. Okay, Roots by I can't remember, Alex Haley, and that is a family drama where generation after generation after generation of Alex Haley's ancestors were portrayed on TV. I think it was in the 1970s or 80s. And so that is known as a family saga or a family drama. And then a political drama, I guess you can't do this one. A political drama obviously involves politics. So that one would be like, I know Robert Redford did a movie in which he goes to Washington. Mr. Candidate goes to Washington. Anyway, so in it, a very naive political candidate starred by Robert Redford, he goes to Washington. He's so idealistic. He wants to change the world. He honestly wants to make this a better place. And instead, when he gets to Washington, he finds everything filled with corruption. Okay, so that's an example of, I'm going to have to look up the name of that movie. It was with Robert Redford. It was in the 70s. He goes to what? Mr. James goes to Washington, Okay, so that's an example of a political drama. There's so many political dramas. Maximalist genre means that you use the least amount of fictional elements in your story. I'm going to wait to see what they have to say about what a maximalist. But anyway, so you could use all of these different kinds of genres. So the uses of genres. There are two central uses of genre for any writer. You might wish to write within a particular genre, in which case your question is, what are the defining characteristics, possible rules of that genre? The best way to see how this is to see how others have done it. So if you're going to decide, I'm going to write science fiction, then it's good to open up a science fiction novel to see what the structure of a science fiction story is. Where is the triggering event? What is the rising action? What is the climax? What is the falling action? And what is the resolution? And then the fun part of writing a science fiction story is you get to create the world in which that science fiction story takes place. You can create an entire new world, an entire new society with different values, just like in The Handmaid's Tale. And so here in Star Trek, for instance, what if the Earth in the 24th century overcame all disease, all hunger, and all war? And everyone, finally the maximalists came through. Anyway, and so you would create, and that's what Gene Roddenberry did in Star Trek, is he created an alternate world, an entirely new world. Then that would be the setting. Okay, so here your setting depends on what genre you decide to write your story. So with Gene Roddenberry, obviously it's Earth in the future. Everything is at peace. And so now Earth gets together and does space exploration to other planets. So that, and then you have your characters interact within that science fiction setting. And so I already talked about what setting is. A setting it establishes the time and the place of your story. So see my previous video on setting. And so when we use genre, so the different genres can also determine what setting you are writing for your stories. And so that's why when you decide you're going to write a particular genre like legal thriller or gothic, okay, if you're going to become a gothic writer, you're going to notice that that involves something like something gloomy, something dark, like a haunted castle. Emily Bronte, you would read classic British literature. You would read about like Great Expectations, and of course the author escapes me, but that is Gothic literature. I remember in one scene, the character was, when she was young, she was beautiful, and she was the wife of the owner of the mansion. And then as she got older, she went totally insane, and so now she lives in the attic. And all she does all day is screaming. And so the new wife comes into the mansion, and the husband says, you cannot go up into the attic. That's the only part of the house that's forbidden to you. And then the husband does not tell the new wife why that's forbidden. And so the wife goes against her husband's wishes, and she starts exploring the house. It's dark and gloomy. And you see the furniture of the other wife, and it's really spooky. Then as you get closer to where the insane wife is, in the forbidden part of the house, you hear screaming. And, you hear furniture moving. That's a Gothic novel, where you have darkness, where you have lots of, and it's in a haunted house. So that's a Gothic. So if you're going to create, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the story. That's actually a very classic story. I think it's Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, I think, off the top of my head. Anyway, that is a Gothic novel, okay? So that was very, very popular in British literature in the 18th and 19th century, and the same thing, American literature as well. So getting back to our different genres, maximalist fiction is where the scope of the fiction encompasses a wide spectrum of history and activity, often incorporating a specialist knowledge of culture, science, history, and related over a long word length. I have to admit I am not familiar with this type of fiction, so I can't give you an example, but I'm going to look this up. See, there's something even I don't know about. So if I wanted to write a fiction in this style that I don't know much about, I would then open it up. I would, I guess, Google it and find out what books are written in that style. Then I would read several books in that genre, familiarize myself with that world, and then I would create my fictional story. So if you're just a beginner in all of this, for me it's just this one I didn't know about, but if you're a beginner in all of these, you could read one novel or the several novels of each of these genres in order to familiarize yourself with the world of these genres. Then in your journal, you can write short stories. You could create your own world, create your own romance, your own historical fiction. You actually have to research the historical events of that time period. For instance, you're not going to say that the Civil War, the American Civil War, occurred in 1975. Okay, so you really have to make sure you have the correct dates, because the American Civil War occurred in 1860 to 1865. And you can't be saying President Nixon was president during the American Civil War in 1860 to 1865. No, that was President Abraham Lincoln. So you got to get your historical facts correct. So if you're going to write historical fiction, you do have to look up the facts. So no, obviously everybody knows that the American Civil War was Abraham Lincoln, 1860 to 1865, and Nixon was 1970, around the time of the Vietnam War. That's Nixon's time period, with the hippies and everything. So if I wanted to write historical fiction anything historical is something at least one generation ago, at least 25 to 50 years ago. That's considered historical. Okay, so what can genres do for you? So each genre has its own qualities, its own plot patterns, its own characteristics. For instance, when you read a murder mystery, you expect there to be a murder, you expect there to be a victim, you expect to have a detective or somebody who's going to try to solve the murder mystery. Then in a romance, you expect a couple of people who are in love with each other or trying to be in love with each other. So each genre has certain expectations. And to fulfill them, if, for instance, you can have your murder mystery open up with a dead body. The romance can have two people very hot and heavy on each other. So that means that as the writer, you have to recognize the familiar elements of each and every genre. And so that when the reader reads your novel, their expectations for that genre are confirmed. And then in the end, the reader and the writer feel a satisfaction in having written a really good fairy tale or having written a very good political novel. And so that's why you have to study the different rules, the plot structure, the story structure of each genre. So the writer enters into a contract with the reader, which says that the writer won't mislead the reader unnecessarily, and ultimately that the writer won't betray the reader by breaking out of the boundaries of the genre that the fiction has encouraged the reader to expect. Does this make for a good piece of fiction? That depends. For example, even if you obey all the rules, don't make your story too predictable. For instance, in a fairy tale, it doesn't always have to have a happy ending. So in this case, in order to shake it up a little, yes, that's where the different genres would overlap. So there might be an X too much, like if you make your story, so don't make your story too predictable. Instead, you would put in something called a red herring. A red herring means that you put in false information within the, okay, so let's say I'm creating a murder mystery, and somebody was killed, and I have to figure out who did it. And so instead of just saying, oh, the butler did it, okay, that's a boring story. So I would lead my reader, and I would make each character look suspicious. It could have been the wife, or it could have been the husband, it could have been the best friend. I make every character look suspicious. That's called a red herring, where you lead the reader off the track, off the scent, and then only towards the end, as you get to the falling action and resolution, do you gradually give the reader hints and foreshadowing as to who the real murderer is. And I remember reading one novel, once again, I can't remember the name of the novel, and so in this murder mystery, the DA was killed. She had plenty of, she had convicted so many criminals. So she was on the SHIT enemy list of all of these different mobs. So the detective had to try to figure out which one of these criminals killed the DA. Okay, so this was a classic. I think Harrison Ford was in this movie, off the top of, I could be wrong. And it was a movie. And at the very end, it turned out to be his wife, because the DA, the detective, this is the plot twist. In the plot twist is that the detective was having an affair with the DA, and his wife had gotten jealous. She was the one who killed the DA. And that's the plot twist. No one would have expected that his wife was the one who killed. Instead, the whole novel was all about one big red herring, in which was it this mobster, that mobster, this mobster. So you can't make, so even though you obey the rules of the different genres, you can still put in enough red herrings into your story to give the story interest. Okay, so one way to make a murder mystery story have interest is lots of red herrings. But in a typical story, you can also add, and also another thing is, if you add a lot of red herrings, you add to the suspense, because the longer the story, the more your reader thirsts for the ending. What's going to happen at the very end? And so that would be suspense, so that we have the triggering event and the rising action up to the climax. That's where you stick in your suspense. That's where you try to make all the characters look suspicious and hook the reader to the edge of their seat. The page turner, the best page turner novel is something that has all of these red herrings, and you've confused the reader so much that they don't know who could be the one that killed the person. Or you have, I think it was called Girl Gone. Okay, all I remember is, so this lady is riding on a train, and every day as she rode on the train, she would see a beautiful woman in her backyard sunning herself with her handsome husband. And as she rode the train every day to work, she would see, at the same time, she would see this beautiful woman with her husband. I don't know how long she did this, months on end, years on end, until one day she's riding on the train, and for several days in a row, she doesn't see that woman anymore, sunning herself. The entire backyard just looks empty, and it looks unkempt. Hence this is a murder mystery. What happened to that woman? Where is the husband? Why does that backyard look so empty and deserted? And then this woman decided to get off her train and investigate. And I think this became a bestseller. I forgot the name of it, Girl Gone. But that's an example of the suspense, in which you give a certain expectation, have a lot of red herrings, you have the triggering event, and that's the girl, in the train, seeing that backyard every day, and envious. She was envious. She was like, oh, I wish I was married and had a beautiful house and that back. Every day she would go by and daydream that's her, until one day, and then here you got the rising action, the triggering event, and then the rising action is, where did they go? They're missing. And the climax is, what happened to them? And as she investigates, she discovers, oh my God, she could have been murdered. Or did the husband do it? Who murdered her? Or something like that. That's where you get the climax. And I don't remember the ending, so I won't ruin it for you. And then and it turns out to be, I think, a plot twist at the very end. So that was a great novel. If I could remember what the name of the novel was, Girl Gone. Okay. But anyway, the point is, as she was able to build suspense. So by raising various expectations in the reader's mind, a writer can create the atmosphere of suspense. There's a desire to turn the page and find out what happened next. How much will the story follow the reader's expectations? How much will it confound them? In this way, suspense is central to why some writing is interesting and some is not. It might be a matter of writing within genres and satisfying the readers, or it might be simply pitch. This is where your writing is created by the extent and nature of the tension between your ideas and characters. In other words, what is the pacing of your story? Is your story fast-paced and interesting? Or did you slow it down with too many red herrings? There's only so many red herrings people can stand. If you put too many red herrings in your story, or you use too much description, then you slow the story down and then the readers lose interest. So you have to have a certain pace, and that's what's difficult in writing, is how do I know how to pace my story so it's not too fast? Okay, that's for a different video. Too slow. So E.M. Forrester, in aspects of the novel, describes the tension as created in Arabian Nights. Oh, okay. In Arabian Nights, this name, I can't remember how to say it. Anyway, the main character is taken prisoner by a mean king. And the king always kills all the foreigners. He takes them prisoner, then he kills them. And so this particular prisoner, well, obviously she wants to stay alive. So she stays alive by telling the king a story. Each night she would say, well, you see, once upon a time, there was a princess. Her name was, and that's it. I will tell you the rest of it tomorrow. Then the next day, okay, then her name was, whatever it was. Then one day she was missing because, and so for 1,000 nights, Arabian Nights, she kept telling parts of her story and then cliffhanger. And so this particular prisoner got to live, and that's how she used the suspense of a story to save her life. And so here we are all like this, and in the end, the king married the queen, married her because she could tell such fascinating stories and keep him interested. So she went from prisoner to queen just because she could tell a story. And so we are all like this storyteller, We want to captivate our audience. We want to have our audience on the edge of their seat. So suspense, therefore, is not restricted to just murder mysteries or crime thrillers. It is the desired aspect of all fiction. It is the quality that inspires a reader to read on. All right, and so in this video, I not only went over the different kinds of genres, I also went over how you have to have and follow the rules of the genre to satisfy the reader. But you can go, and then in order to make the story interesting so that your story is not too predictable, you've got to have suspense and red herrings. In my next video, I will give you suggestions on how you can write stories with plot twists and suspense. And I'm going on 30 minutes, so I'm going to end this video. If you have any questions about this topic, about fiction, how to write fiction, feel free to email me.